The Institute of Internal Auditors presents All Things Internal Audit Tech. In this episode, Ernest Anunciacion and Tom Keaton discuss the evolving role of fraud analytics in internal auditing. They'll cover how data analytics and AI can improve fraud detection and prevention, along with the challenges and practical strategies for success.
Hey, everybody. Maybe just a little bit of an intro, Tom. Appreciate everybody listening in to today's episode where Tom and I are going to talk about fraud analytics. But maybe I think it's a good idea for us to just get acquainted with the audience. So I'll start off and then hand it over to you, Tom. I'm Ernest Anunciacion. I lead our product marketing function here at MindBridge Analytics. I've been in the software game for going on about 10 years now. However, prior to that, I was a chief audit executive. So I spent the better portion of my career, about 15 years, doing everything. Maybe I'm dating myself, Tom, by saying I started my career off as an intern when Sarbanes-Oxley came into the fold in 2002. But yeah, have kind of seen everything from SOX, enterprise risk management, starting internal audit groups from the ground up. Got into risk advisory services and public accounting at some point, and then got into tech. So that's a little bit about me, but I'm very happy to join you today on this episode. Tom, you want to give them a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And excited as well, and looking forward to talking a little bit more. But yeah, just a little bit about me. I am a director of internal audit at Crown Castle. I've been in internal audit in some way, shape, or form my entire career, going back to the early 2000s. So I'll date myself just as much as you did on the early SOX years, Ernest. And my roles across my various experiences and stops along the way have all included technology in some way, shape, or form, and risk and advisory. Currently, I do a lot of work in the space of automation, analytics, starting to thread in some AI to have a little fun with some of the new technologies, and spend a good bit of my day looking through fraud investigations, risk, and whatnot. So, really excited to dive in and see how we overlap in those spaces.
Yeah, I bet you have some phenomenal stories to tell. But before we get to those, maybe let's just start with the basics. When you're thinking about fraud, and you mentioned some cutting edge technology like data analytics and automation AI, how have some of those technologies kind of changed the game for internal auditors over the course of time that you've seen it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say it's in two ways is the way I would answer it. One is not nearly enough, because you hear all the technology, and for probably a solid, gosh, I'd say maybe a decade or more, you would hear about using data analytics to do internal audits and different things. But when you really talk to people, did anyone actually do it? Like, there was very few that would do anything other than maybe pulling populations, selecting samples, but truly doing internal audit work through data analytics was kind of a unicorn. It wasn't very often, and sometimes it felt like a myth. So there was a little bit of head banging on the desk a little bit, where you're trying to figure out, how to use these technologies and these theories. But then I'd say within the last couple of years, we're starting to see some breakthroughs, and I think that a lot of that goes to data quality and the way that organizations are actually going through that digital transformations and creating a more digital organization. And then you have again, dating ourselves one more time, more digitally forward people entering the workforce. They're used to having data at their
Right.
fingertips and wanting certain types of data, and then the tools are just starting to be phenomenal. You no longer have to be the expert code writer to be able to build some things. A lot of are drag and drop, or you can do right and using Gen AI, you're able to write it what you want to do, and it can give you some code that you can use. So really starting
Right.
to see some fascinating breakthroughs there, and I think we're just at the beginning. It's really going to start taking off in a way that is going to seem like futuristic to us today. Is probably going to be just a few weeks to a year or two away from now.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I remember a time where on an Excel spreadsheet, you were limited to 65,000 rows.
That's right.
And so when big data and data analytics kind of came about, and that was such a buzzword, I want to say 15 years ago, as a CAE, I had a mandate where I said every audit we do, whether it was an assurance audit, a compliance audit, an IT audit, you have to have an element of data analytics. But we didn't know where to start. So we actually were building Microsoft Access databases to test entire populations of transactions. And even then, the populations probably weren't more than, a couple 100,000. So how do you really get coverage? So there's a quote out there that says that the data explosion is at this exponential rate. It's not just doubling over the course of 18 months or so. It's almost like tripling, and it's just going to keep getting bigger. So from your perspective, how does let's put it through the lens of fraud, and how does fraud and analytics kind of fit into the bigger picture of how you see organizations managing their overall risk?
Yeah, I love this topic. I mean, with what I deal with day to day on our risk management side, as well as fraud, not just investigation, but also detection, prevention, and so forth. Data is woven all throughout that. For me, it's also it's a tough kind of riddle to crack. From a investigation perspective, if you get an allegation, you have a concrete claim to go off of, or some tip that you can look into. It gives you a head start, and once you have a head start, you can take a look at some vendor analytics. You can see who's popping out as maybe as somebody guiding most of their work to a certain vendor that happens to be maybe giving them a kickback on the side, or do we have a certain vendor that's coming back and doing change orders and rework to slowly increase the cost in which you're paying. So to me, what I call those investigative analytics. Those are ones that I have some dashboards built or some queries that we run that we can do standard. That's going to give you a profile, so to speak, of that specific claim. Where I've had some difficulty over the years, and others that I've talked to, is the predictive or the identifying analytics that you can go and you can run certain queries and using data warehouses and different data sources to be able to say, hey, this is starting to look funny. It's starting to play kind of outside the lines a little bit. Maybe we should go and look into this project manager or this vendor or this construction project. That's been tough. That's a little bit harder because the data is coming from all over the place. It's a little bit of a different way of thinking from an audit perspective to be predictive. So we're starting to try to find a way to dabble into that space, but using analytics once we kind of have a place to look has been a huge boost to our productivity, our success rate, to being able to either substantiate or even refute the claim. You don't always want it to be right. You hope it's not always the claim isn't always right, but it's given us more confidence in our conclusions by being able to be data driven to get those investigations off the ground.
So when a claim does come in, maybe through a whistleblower or ethics hotline, do you operate under the guise of innocent until proven guilty, or the opposite?
That's a great question because I never thought about it until I took a more formal training probably 10 years ago, and I take it as almost innocent until proven guilty. And so for me, I think that's also a mentally cleansing approach,
Yeah,
because when you're an internal audit, all you see typically is bad, right? It's let's go in and find the problem here, find the problem there. How do we fix this?
right.
Investigation's the same thing. So you layer bad on bad on bad, and you're always you want to feel some good somewhere, right? So for me, I like to be able to go in with that mindset of, okay, we've got this claim here. Let's. I'm hoping it's not legitimate, and take it from that standpoint. Now, that success rate on that's not terribly high. Usually, claims are
Right.
they're pretty credible for the most part. So there's usually something there. But yeah, I like that. That's the method I like to follow. How about yourself? What kind of mindset do you have in those situations?
Oh, I'm gonna take the consulting route and say it depends. It depends on it depends on what the claim is, how far-fetched it could
Hmm.
be. I've seen some crazy things in my time at Audit. And we'll save some of the stories for later, but I agree with you, Tom. I think innocent until proven guilty, right? It just that you got to have some sort of compassion around it, right? It's not, I don't think internal auditors are, and that's the reputation that kind of precedes us. We're we're looking for the bad cops. We're cops, but we're like internal affairs, and we're looking. No, that's not the case. We are charged with helping the organization with change management and protecting shareholder value. And that's what we want to do through our risk analysis, our risk assessments. Um, that's why I always love doing more advisory type work, right? Like I knew my team was being successful
Absolutely.
I knew my team was being successful when a C-suite executive came to me and said, Ernest, I would love for you to take a look at this process. Something just doesn't seem, to your point earlier, something seems off, something doesn't seem right. Can you come in, give us an analysis, give us an independent, objective opinion or recommendations on what we could do better? Those were my favorite audits to do for sure. Tom, I do want to go back to what you're talking about, like some of the difficulty when you're trying to find trends and you're trying to find patterns. Now, when you get a claim, that I feel like that's a lot easier because it's like, boom, you know what you're looking for. Versus if you have vast amount of data,
Certainly.
right? Like think about all the different systems within your organization, ERP, payroll systems, data warehouses, data lakes, et cetera, GLs. What other kind of red flags would you recommend people look out for? And maybe it's not a red flag immediately, but where there's smoke, there's fire. But like, what are some of those warning signs people should be looking for?
Yeah, that's again, that's like looking through the crystal ball to find those answers, right? That's such a challenge. And the other piece to that whole puzzle is even if you know what those may be, I don't know how many internal audit compliance functions are out there that have the staffing and the budget to be able to build those complex models that are potentially going to give you those answers. I'll start it off with a super big cop out of it's really hard,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
every business is different. But it's all in how you look at it, and something that we've been really trying to develop over the years,
Mm,
even if it's just from a concept to make us think a little bit differently. I'll use a vendor. Let's say there's some potential corruption with a vendor that we're trying to find. Right, we don't have a tip, but we're trying to find is there something there. I mentioned overusage by a single person, but we want to think more broadly and almost come up with kind of like a hit list, a hit matrix or something like that, where maybe we have a suite of 10 different analytics that looks like percentage of spend, change orders, how many POs have gone in. Take your pick. All of these different litany of things that on the surface, an individual singular analytic that you might run may not give you that red flag that you're looking for. But if you take the look at those top 10 or whatever that number is, and then you can kind of add some weights and measures to them, and then you look at them and holistically, and you can score them amongst their other vendors and doing the same type of work in the same areas, that you might be able to eventually start pulling out some things that can give you some places to look. Now, I'm also fortunate within my group. I oversee the fraud piece, but it's also within internal audit. And I know sometimes those are split out. So for the instance, if we're going through something like that and we see that we have a couple of hits on something or some, again, this is more conceptual than in practice at this point for us, but as those scores maybe tick up, that might allow us to say, hey, we should go do a construction audit of this project in this city. Something might be off here. Let's go take a look. Or maybe we send a survey out to see if there's a way to get some people to prompt, or maybe it's a fraud training that we go out to that part and try to just poke our nose in there to see if we can find a little bit more within that group or area or vendor. But it's really challenging. My organization isn't terribly transactional, so we don't manufacture things, we don't sell items, we're not really consumer driven in that way. So it gets to be more challenging there to be able to find some of those things. We're not dealing with inventory or shrinkage or things along those lines, but it definitely gives you the mental challenge and to kind of give you the creativity to go in and find different ways to slice the data to kind of turn it on its side and find some interesting details there.
So, Tom, would it be fair to say that what you're mentioning, some of these dashboards, is that akin to continuous monitoring, or are those dashboards really just early warning signals? Like, how do you think about that? And then where do you think continuous monitoring plays a role within fraud and analytics?
That's a great jump. like this is going to sound silly to say, like the advent of dashboards, like that's such a pervasive concept now in the last interactive dashboards, I should say, right? It is such a pervasive concept that's really taken hold in probably the last 5 or 6 years with some of the different softwares coming out, like Tableau being one. Now Power BI is kind of all over the place as well, and I look at those as more informational and monitoring. Continuous monitoring in a way, sure, but to me, a continuous monitoring process is something that's going to be running in the background. And if a transaction hits A, B, and C attributes, I'm getting an email or a text message or an alert that's like, "Hey, we got to go look at this," and it gets you out of your chair pretty quick, and you go and take a look, and you spin up an audit or something along those lines. Whereas when it comes to the dashboarding pieces, I think that's more, how's my business running? Am I in control? Now it could show you some stuff, but to me, and maybe I just haven't been able to crack that code when it comes to looking at some of those dashboards, but I use those specifically for um, operating within an investigation. So once I'm in an investigation, I have the details on what we're looking at. Those are extremely valuable because now you can click and filter and sort to be able to show different highlights, and then you can see some of the outliers based on the criteria that you're inputting. Whereas the continuous monitoring, I feel like they're actually out there looking. Those bots are looking for the outliers and alerting us to those to go and take a look at.
Yeah, and one of the best analogies I use in explaining continuous monitoring to folks is, think about your credit card. Let's say you're traveling to Erie, Pennsylvania, and you've never been there before, and you go to the local hardware store and you run up a $500 charge. What's going to happen immediately? Your card's declined because those financial services, those credit card companies, they and the point of sale systems and everybody have so much sophistication or in terms of patterns and behaviors and where you've been shopping. And the minute your transactions decline, that's what continuous monitoring is. So, um, Tom, I want to dig in a little bit in terms of the analytics that you use within your investigations. Can you talk about, do I need to learn programming language to set up some of those types of queries? Like, what kind of skill sets do you have, and what do those analytics look like?
Yeah, another great question, and for me, like I said, I got lucky in my career, and that allowed me to kind of get into some of that stuff early on, and even if it was just using some basic Excel functionality, that at least embeds the thought process into your head, on how some querying and different things might work. But I will say, we had to hire on some special help for that one. So we made the decision, probably 4 or 5 years ago, that analytics was the future for audit in every sense of the word, be it investigative support, risk assessment, audit, so on and so forth. And we tried to tend to do a one step, one foot in approach. And so we had, I think at the time we had maybe a 10-person shop, and so we are like, hey, we'll take one person out and put that person into an analytics role. Um, we were able to kind of do a proof of concept to show that it worked, and we got some support there. But we also realized, like, all we were trying to do was
Thanks.
upskill an auditor that had some experience in there. So we got proof of concept, and eventually we hired somebody who had the right skill set, not an auditor by trade, but had some background of business and finance and understanding some of the inner workings of a normal organization would. But it wasn't until we had somebody who had that sophistication, Ernest, who was able to truly bring that
Yeah.
professionalism to us. So while there's ways I think that you can limp through, and you can do some things that are going through Excel or a Power BI that's not terribly sophisticated, that your average user could build. Um, to me, I think it's really important to have that dedicated skill set to allow you to build that. And we even went through the phase of outsourcing that. We got some good relationships with some firms that had that, and we kind of went and hunted and pecked through to find the right ones in the right ways with the right tools and technology, and how we could transfer all of those. I'm sure you deal with some of that in your world these days too, and we were, again, really
All the
successful.
time.
But
All the
and
time.
that's something I tell people a lot, that are new to trying to build out this program with them. I say, don't be afraid to call for help. You got to start there, and that way you learn and you can see where it goes, and you can build a foundation that way.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about that skill set, and I joked earlier, but I was actually being real that, building an Access database to do my testing at the time, I took a basic SQL database course in undergrad and thought, oh, I could write my own queries for it. But it got to a certain point where I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do this join properly. And so I would go off into our IT department and talk to a DBA and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. And can you help build it? I'm starting to see a lot more as I talk to other folks in the profession. You mentioned earlier, hiring people with different skill sets. I can teach somebody how to audit. It's not rocket science. I mean, sometimes it can be,
Yes.
but
Yes.
some of the joys I had in my career were doing rotational programs and getting people from the business to come join my team for a 6-month rotation. Because again, I can teach an engineer how to be an auditor, but I can't teach an auditor how to be an engineer. And getting them kind of that well-rounded experience, those were some of the best. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk artificial intelligence, AI. Are you using it as part of your fraud investigations or your analytics? I don't know what your company's stance is, if they're for it, if they're against it. But yeah, I mean, talk to us a little bit about your usage of AI, if there is any.
Yeah, it's low. It's low.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
to me, it's still a little experimental. We don't have anything, like a private GPT type ring or anything in there yet. So throwing data in is a big,
Yeah.
strict no for us, as I think it is for many organizations right now. But I'm really, really excited about it. I'll be curious to hear some of your thoughts and from where you're seeing AI implementation here, because like in my head, thinking, down the road, future thought is once we are able to start leveraging some of these. And I was doing an investigation early this morning, and I'm going through emails over and over and looking for. It's like all I'm thinking is if I could just throw some sort of AI bot on this thing and have almost a Gen AI type conversation, like, this is the investigation, this is what I'm looking at, this is the time frame, and let this thing just go wild on a O365 PST file would save me so much time. That is to me the longest amount of time. And I mean, when I first started doing investigations, you would look at emails, you'd be like, oh, this is cool. You're getting this peek under the covers of all this stuff. Now I've been doing it for so long. You're like, I hate this. It takes forever.
It's
I
not.
just want to push a button and let it be done.
Yes.
So yeah, so we're in infancy on trying to use it. We do use some of the stuff a little bit more on the audit side, but I'd be curious to see what you're seeing within your experience and your client base, that how that's going to kind of starting to take off the ground here.
Yeah. So I'll preface the conversation with, there are multiple flavors of artificial intelligence. And I think, in fact, no, I know generative AI. So things like ChatGPT or Llama, etc., Copilot from Microsoft. Generative AI, in my mind, is more of a productivity suite. It can do things that humans can do, but at a rate so much faster. Like, hey, write me an email to the CEO of this company and I want to pitch my product to them. And then you can iterate on it, right? And so I see a ton of value from a productivity standpoint. Oh, let me give you a perfect example, Tom. I was helping one of our salespeople with some account planning, and I told them, I was like, "Hey, go download. They're publicly traded. Go download their annual report, attach it into ChatGPT, and have it summarize the key risks for it." And it did it in a matter of seconds, right? So to your point of your example of having to comb through emails and documentate, I don't know whether, I mean, the future is so bright with what AI is. However, I understand the risks that it introduces and why certain organizations may have a very hard stance, either for it or against it, or at your own leisure, at your own risk. Just don't use our data in there. But even just from a non-audit standpoint of AI and the amount of content that it can create. So I remember when AI was kind of getting big last year, um, and it created a song that I think was using Kanye West's voice and lyrics, but had another producer's beat. and it went viral, and people thought it was a real song, and the record companies were scrambling, like, how do we get this down? I mean, and then you hear about deep fakes, right? Deep fakes is a big thing right now
Right.
too. And what is that going to do for like social engineering? And every technological advance has its good and its bad. So generative AI, I think the last thing I'll say about it is the rate of adoption of ChatGPT, and I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, but it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. So if you just go and Google like, hey, how many users adopted ChatGPT? Like, yeah,
It's
it's
wild.
crazy. So, Tom, I know you and I could sit here and talk forever. Uh, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. And I got to ask you one last question. Can you share a story, maybe not the craziest story or investigation that you did, but something that maybe made you say, wow, what were they thinking? Or, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe it. Is there anything that you could share to kind of round out our conversation?
Yeah, yeah. I'd be there's always a bunch of stuff that comes to mind. We could probably talk for a couple hours on a few of these things and how in depth some of them go. But what always ends up getting me are the ones that are the head scratchers, like you said. It's like, how did you get yourself there, right? Like, no, and there's other ones that are just like the bizarre claims that come in. I mean, there's one I'm going to give you two. I'm not. This one will be quick. Is the most bizarre claim I ever got? And it wasn't even bizarre. It was like strange, I guess, is we got a call that came into the hotline, and it literally all it said was, I was told that I was too old. And then the next thing was like, where does it happen? It goes the whole demographics, and it said fourth floor. Well, we have offices all over the country. We've got several fourth floors. There's a lot of people. So you get these calls in and you're like, okay, not much I can do with that, but I see where maybe you were headed. But what that usually brings me to is a whole lot of frustration when you get that was a call in a case obviously we couldn't do much with. They never responded back when we asked some questions. But that is something that brings a ton of frustration for me is when the call comes in and it was way more fulsome than I was told I was too old, something like that. But that has a lot of truth to it, but it doesn't give you enough detail, and you struggle to get an investigation going, and you're sending messages back to the trying to go through. We use an anonymous hotline, and so you can't just call them back, but you can send them through a portal. As long as they log back in, you can talk. But um, a lot of times they don't respond, and so you're stuck with things. So that breeds some frustration. But one in particular, I can throw out that's pretty innocuous, but it was frustrating and kind of interesting was. We had, and we see these things all the time. Every company does is expense fraud, right? It's teeny. And that's the one, by the way, we could probably talk for an hour on analytics. That's the simplest thing to do some analytics over. But we had somebody who was submitting multiple expenses over and over. They were very disorganized, and you went through the investigation with them, and quite frankly, we would say, okay, look, this seems like a lot of mistakes, a lot of wasn't intentional fraud, a whole lot of waste, but not intentional fraud.
Yeah,
So he
right.
kind of was let off the hook a little bit, just pay the money back, no harm, no foul. About a week later, I see his manager. I said, "Hey, how's so and so?" And the response back was like, "Well, we fired him yesterday." I was like, "What do you mean? I thought you were keeping him." It's like, "No, same thing again, $9 for something else." So that's not the funniest. It's not the most outrageous, but to me, that's the one of those things that's always stuck out in my head that some people just don't learn, or they aren't deterred by a potential repercussion, or even put through the ringer of having to be interviewed by internal audit or legal or compliance or whomever it is. They still find a way to either A, screw up, or B, think they're okay, I'm off the hook so I can do this stuff again. And you find it just keeps circling on back. And once you've done this type of a job long enough, you kind of run out of head scratchers a little bit, though.
I mean, the patterns definitely start to show themselves, and I think T&E is an easy one, right? Like, um, oh, no receipts required for anything $25 and below. Well, then I start to see patterns: 24.99, 24.98, 24.97. Come on, who are you kidding, right? I mean, we got to look for that stuff. Well, good chat, Tom. It's so great having you on today's episode, and hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely enjoyed it very much. It was great talking to you. Would welcome the opportunity to jump back on anytime.
If you'd like to hear more from Ernest, you can catch his session at the 2025 Fraud Virtual Conference on February 20th. Learn the latest in fraud prevention and detection from experts, all online. Register at the IIA.org or check the show notes. You don't want to miss out. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and rate us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also catch other episodes on YouTube or at the IIA.org. That's THEIIA.org.